Hi everyone. Stuart and I are meeting today to have a chat about our early careers and where we've got to, influences in music and things like that. We've actually worked together for 10 years now.
10
years now. Sorry about that. And we meet regularly to work as a duo these days, and we still don't know where our training started off and background knowledge. So it's a chance for us to catch up, and we thought you might be interested in a bit of background knowledge as well.
You realise this might be opening up a can of worms.
It could be, yeah. It could be the end of a good friendship, but we're fine. So, Stuart, how did your training get all started off?
Well, I was at a primary school in Eastleek, which is in Leicestershire, not too far from Loughborough, and there wasn't a lot of music going on in that primary school, and we used to troop into the morning assembly day after day to spring from the Four Seasons. Yep. That was it. It was the same thing every time. And then one morning we trooped in, and it wasn't spring; it was Shostakovich.
Bit of a shock.
It was a very bit of a shock, and we knew then that there was something different. And the main difference was we had a new teacher, a Mr. Weavell, and he was a multi-instrumentalist. He played recorders.
I'm pleased to hear it. Every good musician plays recorders.
Flutes, guitar, and violin. And he said, so I've got all of these instruments, and I want you to go home and tell your parents that I will be offering lessons. So, being a very dutiful young man, I went home, and I was an angel. The horns came later. Well, I went home and I told my mum and dad, and I thought nothing else of it. But it turned out that in the family there was a violin, and not just any violin. It was a Stradivarius violin. It was very rare, and a not very well known one. Legend had it that old man Stradivarius had been on his summer holidays in the Cannock Chase when he'd found himself a little bit short on cash, so we chopped up a bar billiards table and created the Cannock Stradivarius, which is the instrument that was passed to me to learn on. It later transpired that this was in fact a Victorian factory-made fiddle, and I would have had to have paid somebody to take it off my hands. A truly awful instrument, but I still have it for sentimental values.
Have to hear it sometime.
If you don't behave yourself, you will. Anyway, I was his first violin student, and never looked back. Loved it from the word go. How about yourself? How did you get started?
Oh, well, we lived in inner city Coventry, so not so far away. In fact, my grandparents are from Loughborough. That's where my dad was brought up.
Oh, good grief, this is a small one. I didn't know before today that you come from Coventry.
Well, there you go.
I was born Coventry too.
You were born Coventry too. There we go. Midlanders, I'm afraid, even though we both live in the northeast now. There we go. And my mum is a self-taught musician, or was at that stage. She's had a few lessons since, but one of her instruments was recorder. My dad is a very good pianist, but my mum was self-taught, and we lived in a city parish. My dad was a vicar, and a lot of the children had nothing to do in the evenings. So my mum started a recorder club, because you could get recorders cheaply and so on. So there would be two groups come along. There would be the youngsters would arrive for their introductory lessons, whilst the older ones were charged with making the tea, which was soup and toad in the hole.
Toad in the hole?
Or, yeah, because that would be prepared hand just stuck in the Argo.
Okay.
And then they'd have their lesson, which to start off with, I was in with them. And then they swapped over, and whilst the younger ones got to clear up, the older ones got their lessons. And so I started, because my hands were too small for anything else, started off on sopranino recorder. And she was very strict, because we all learned to read music properly. It was a real lesson in how to read music and historical background and stuff and so on like that.
And you kept it on even though you started on the sopranino?
I did, yeah.
I had to tell you that those of you who know my daughter has been corrupted by this woman. My daughter played the fiddle, happily just played the fiddle, and Mary took her to the dark side of recorders. And I can tell you that of all the recorders that she now plays, the Sopranino is the least favourite of the family. So, yeah, thanks for that, pal.
You're welcome. Anytime. Anytime you can infuse torture into it, it's just fine.
Oh, man. So, okay, you started there. You were taught to read music from the word go. Did you do much work by ear?
And the playing by ear came at school, because at school they didn't teach you to read music. So if I wanted to play along with the recorder group at school, they put just the letter names up on the board, and I didn't actually know which letter names went with which one. And I'd learnt on F instruments, and they were playing the normal school descant.
Right.
So I had a descant in my hands, but had no clue how the letter names. So I just picked that bit up by ear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good. I was taught by the numbers. It was D1, D2, D3, and we learned quasi-guitar, or just quasi-guitar. Actually, it was much more like a ukulele.
Funny how these things come round, isn't it?
In it just. And so, okay, what about formal qualifications after that?
I had no formal qualifications at all till I went on to Coventry School of Music as a sixth former.
Right.
I can remember my audition/interview for the Coventry School of Music, because basically I'd had, apart from 2 years lessons on the flute, which I used to cycle out to my flute lesson for, I had no formal training other than what my mum had given me, and she's not a qualified musician at all. Enthusiastic and very knowledgeable, but doesn't have formal qualifications. And so my audition went along the lines of, I played something on recorder, which I'd had no lessons on. Played something on the flute, which must have been what I did for my GCSE. I had a term on my flute from a clarinet teacher to get me through, well, it was O-levels in those days, to get me through my O-level practical. And then strummed along and sang to a song I'd composed, because my brother and I were travelling around the folk clubs.
You're kidding.
And that's every Saturday night we were out around the folk gospel groups, and there's a trio of us. And that's, so I had no formal qualifications till my sixth form.
You're telling me you were a folkie before you became...
I was not folky, trad folk. It was the days of the singer-songwriter, and we borrowed LPs out of the Coventry Library.
Yeah.
And we would put them on, find the tracks we wanted, and my brother would take down the bass because he was good at the harmony because of his training in the choir, cathedral choir.
Sure.
I would take down the melody, and my friend would be working out the chords and stuff like that, and we would make our own arrangements.
That's astonishing. You heard it here first. Mary is a folkie first.
Where I've come back to.
Oh, that's great to know. That's great to know.
And whereas you went up through the grade system.
I did.
Yeah.
I was pushed very quickly through the grades. I didn't know anything else. I was, I just turned 13, I think, when I took grade 8 and got that done and out the way with. And I remember the next lesson was my violin teacher, Jack McDougall, who was a very fine teacher, lovely man, smoked like a chimney. And he said, right, now we can get on with some music. What have we been doing to that point? But it really opened up at that point. And I was aware of other music. And my mum, she would sing around the house a lot of folk songs, pop songs, whatever. But my dad was a real classical music buff. We'd be listening to Mahler, and Bruckner, and lots of Wagner. From earliest memories, that's how we fell asleep. Was listening to my father's LPs at night. And if we ever had a night where we would be struggling to sleep and the music wasn't on, I remember we would go downstairs and ask Dad to put on a bit of Bruckner or a bit of Wagner, and that would send us off.
Whereas I got to know the piano repertoire very well, despite the fact I didn't play the piano, because my dad always came back from meetings at about 10 o'clock at night, and his way of winding down was to play the piano. And it was Beethoven, Liszt, Haydn, Bach.
Fantastic.
And that's what we had in the background at night. Yeah.
Oh. the things that you immerse yourself in your formative years.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you've done your formative years, you've crossed over from the folky stuff into art music, and you've gone to the Coventry School of Music. What about your first gig?
The first gigs would have been in the folk clubs when we were travelling around with our guitars and everything else like that, putting a couple of sets together for each place, the way we did there, how a load of people turn up, do a set of 3 songs or so, another one in the second half. And if we had time, back on the buses across Coventry to the next one. So it's so those are the first gigs.
It was a thriving folk scene around Coventry.
It was, yeah. And as I say, we weren't, because of our age, we couldn't get into the trad folk stuff because they would have been in the pubs. So this was the what was happening in the youth clubs and stuff like that. But there was quite a lot of places we could go to, and so on. First classical gigs would have been while I was at Coventry School of Music, because I actually went to Coventry School of Music. I don't know what instrument I did, but everybody there had singing lessons.
Yeah.
Because they reckoned that if you were going to be a music teacher, and most of you would be music teachers, not performers, you needed to be confident using your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And they very quickly picked up on the fact that I had a reasonable voice, they thought. And so I went in with recorder and flute probably as my main things, but I'd sung all the time in the group because we all sang together, the 3 of us, as well as played.
Yeah.
And exited again as a first study singer.
Really?
Yeah, exited as a first study singer. So my first gigs in the classical world would have been doing small solos for local choral societies, or providing the semi-choruses and stuff with other singers from the...
I'm going to shock you now. I was a second study singer. It's true. It's true. The reason being was I studied for a couple of years at Colchester during A-levels.
Colchester. We'll come back to that in a minute. Colchester connections as well.
God, crikey. So at Colchester, you had to be either a first or a second study pianist. And I didn't have any piano skills whatsoever. But they let me on the course on the proviso that I got to a grade 5 standard on the piano at the end of the first year. At the end of the first year, they wouldn't even put me in for grade 1 because they thought I would fail it and disgrace the course.
I got there quicker than him at that stage.
but because of my meagre beginnings, they insisted that I took something else as a second instrument, and they chose the voice. And I passed my grade 6. I was studying for grade 8 on the voice, but I do remember my singing teacher was often in tears.
Of laughter? Or despair?
I was too oblivious to know. So there you go. So, but the first gigs for you were on the folk scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas my first ones were playing sort of youth orchestras and all of that. Youth orchestras, and I have to say, boozy affairs they were as well, because the youth orchestra went into the 20s.
Oh, right, okay. Which youth orchestra was that?
That was Essex, the Essex Youth Orchestra.
Oh, you were down in Essex by then? Okay.
I was by then. And that's where I was introduced at a very, very early age, far too early to be legal, to the sins of drink by brass players and wind players.
I'm surprised they talked to the fiddle players.
It's well, what can I say? I think they just took pity on me and took me under their wing. I was the youngest one in the orchestra at the time, so it was a question of that.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, let's take a break after that confession of underage drinking. I can feel a need for a refreshing glass of water.
Okay.
We'll see you in a jiff.
Just water, promise.
So here we are back again. We have discovered that we are going to be brutally honest and open, almost Trumpian in how open we are going to be.
Don't go there.
This dates this interview. Just yesterday. I thought, what a car crash! My goodness.
I don't know. I'm avoiding the news. I'm on holiday the most.
Honestly, if you want a little bit of heavy entertainment, it's quite spectacular.
Right.
So it's better actually that you haven't seen it, and we'll just we'll go in our own sweet way. We were talking about early careers, and but Miss Nat, did you study music?
I did, yes. From Colchester School of Music, I ended up at Colchester. Colchester Institute was where I did my degree, because at that time, if you went to university to do a music degree, you could do it without performance. And I'm no academic, so that was not going to work. And if you went to one of the conservatoires, you didn't end up with a degree. And I already had a diploma, so I didn't want to come out without a degree. So there were 3 places, I think, at that stage where you could get a degree and a major in performance.
And Colchester was one of those.
And Colchester was one.
And a cracking place. So Bill Tamblyn and Chris Phelps.
Absolutely, yeah, completely.
Because that's where I was doing my A-levels. And Glyn Parfitt, was he still there?
No, I think he must have come in between our whiles.
Okay,
yeah,
so...
No, but Bill had just started. It was his first post. Bill Tamblyn.
There you
his
go.
first post. And Peter Holman.
Oh, yeah.
Was my tutor. His first lectureship. Alan Bullard.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, this is just too bad. Oh, my goodness me.
I mean, seriously, I had no clue that we had Colchester in common.
So did you study piano there? Because that would you must have done.
Put it this way, they, like you, I took up piano at 17 because I needed grade 5 in order to be accepted onto a music degree.
Yeah.
So I got there in time, did an extra year at 6th form.
Yeah.
And so on, because they did a diploma course as well. But when I went there, you had to have piano supposedly as your second study.
That's right.
But I managed to wing it, so I did 3 instruments. So I went as a first study singer, second study recorder player. I had to drop the flute, came back to that one after college, and third study piano. No. Yep.
No, oh, God, this is terrible, because I had always been told that I was the first student to be allowed not to do piano first or second study.
No, I was there ahead of you.
You were there ahead?
But on the degree course, not on the A-level course.
Oh, that's okay then. That's
yeah.
But no, they didn't specify the A-level course. Do you know?
Yep.
That's it. Or my self-image has been shattered.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, you can see how sorry she is about that. But that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you were at Colchester as well.
Yeah, I was at Colchester as well. Ended up as joint first study singing recorders, did joint first study recitals at the end. But you still had to do your keyboard harmony.
Yeah.
And do you remember the big hall which came down either side?
Absolutely.
That flooded occasionally? I don't know whether it flooded in your
Yes, it still flooded in my day.
My final recitals were done with me on one side of that flood, the examiners on the other side, and I did on different days, they did let me do a record recital and a singing recital on 2 different days, and I did my keyboard harmony after my singing recital. So I'd been accompanied by Ian Ray, who was stunning accompanist. And then I had to sit down at this Steinway Grand with this stagnant pool between me and the examiners, and they had to hear me completely unable to do keyboard harmony in any way, shape or form.
What you need to know as well is that at the back of the Colchester Institute was an abattoir. Do you remember the abattoir?
I do, yes, I'd forgotten about that.
So stagnant water was
interesting.
It was very interesting.
Can't believe it's still flooded by the time you were there. So anyway, there we go. What a coincidence.
That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant.
So how did you go from there into folk?
Well, by the time I was at Colchester, they were recruiting a lot of people from Northern Ireland.
Okay.
And so a lot of people who had been playing in things like the Ulster Youth Orchestra came over to study on the course in Colchester, and they would be doing the degree course and the performance degree.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were very well versed in folk music and fiddle music in particular. And so it was what we used to do for recreation. They would get out the O'Neill's collection, so right, read that. And it was just recreation. It was just great fun.
In that long coffee bar?
So say again?
In the long coffee bar?
No, that was upstairs in the practice rooms.
Oh, right, okay.
It was we were treated as sight reading practice and musical development.
Of course.
But I think I did it with a bit of a classical accent. My reels would have been tom, which used to make them laugh, something chronic. That whole thing about musical language. So that was my first introduction to that different language. And at the same time, to make ends meet, I was playing in pubs and restaurants with a pianist. Who was also a very, very fine bass player. And we used to go and we used to use the old Busker's books to play the repertoire. And he was great. He would play anything. He was just so open with his appreciation of music. But he put fascinating rhythm in front of me one evening. I thought, yes, fine, I can play this. And he had to stop playing in the middle of it as he practically fell off the piano. So it was a very diverse course. They loads of interest, and it was famous for its electronic music, of course, as well.
Right.
Yeah,
I wasn't aware of the. That must have developed since.
Yeah.
In the gap in between the electronic. But it was always, of course, a place that was very wide, open to all sorts of things going on. I think because you didn't have the pressures of being at the London Conservatoires. The teachers the instrumental teachers we had, were the same as you would have had if you'd been up in London. And in fact, they paid for me to travel up to London once a fortnight because there were only in one or two other recorder players, so we travelled up to London. For our lessons once a fortnight.
The quality of the teaching was outstanding.
Absolutely outstanding. But because it was a small department, you got to try all sorts of things out and play all sorts of different roles in it, which you wouldn't have had the opportunity to at the conservatoires.
I never got there. Because I didn't go to conservatoire. I stopped studying music after A levels. I just decided classical music as a career wasn't for me, so I went off to study history, and studied history at Manchester, which I absolutely loved. Had a great time doing that, and it was after graduating from Manchester that I was in the pub with my father, and I saw a fiddle player playing in a trio. And I recognised it because she had been at the Colchester Institute.
Oh, blimey.
And she had picked up the folky stuff in the same way I had from all the musicians coming over from Ireland. And she played that, and I thought, I remember having such great fun with that. That's what I want to do. And that's how I got back into the folk music and how I really got going. And that was it. That was it. I was certifiably unemployable from that point on. How about you? So you started off in the folk clubs, then you studied at Colchester.
Yeah.
Where did your performance career go after that?
Well, I realised fairly quickly towards the end of my time at Colchester that my interests were very broad, and in fact history was one of the interests and things like that, and I didn't have the skills or the languages to make it as a singer in the classical world, and also I'm not ever so fond of lieder or opera, and in those days...
What?
I know, but in those days you couldn't be a singer unless that was the main thing, and these days if I could have been a choral singer, with professional choirs, with a bit of jazz in and a bit of everything else, I might have pursued the career a little bit more. But there wasn't an opening there. There wasn't the early music scene recorder world, and I hadn't got my flute stuff going at that point, my early music flute stuff going at that point. So in fact, I changed tack and went into librarianship.
Gosh, really?
Yep. I went and worked in qualified as a librarian. It takes as long to qualify as a librarian as a doctor. You
will get no gainsaying from me that the most interesting people I have ever met, present company accepted, of course, have been librarians. And they're amazing, honestly. They are absolutely, you want a question answered, ask a librarian, because the breadth of knowledge is astonishing. Yeah. Present company accepted, of course.
Unfortunately, very true. But I actually, you have to do a year's training before you go off to do your postgrad certificate in librarianship. And I worked for Which? Consumers Association as an information officer for Which.
I subscribe.
Who I say? I don't.
Is there something I should know?
No. And then I ended up, it was actually that brought me up to the northeast. Wow. I got my first professional job after getting my postgrad qualifications in Gateshead.
Really?
in Gateshead, which had one of the best training courses after that.
Fantastic.
And so on. So, but always kept music going, and I sang with BBC Symphony Chorus and stuff while I was down in London and things like that. So, so always kept music there and things, but didn't pursue it as a career at that point.
So, I mean, I know you sing with the Symphonia Chorus as well. How did you make that tie?
I love working in a choir. I've sung with a lot of different choirs, small ones, one or two to a part, the symphony choruses and stuff like that. I love making music in a group. That's what it comes down to. And if you're in a choir that's associated with a really top professional orchestra, you're working with top professional conductors, top professional soloists, and I wouldn't get that opportunity elsewhere in my career to do that. And I learned so much on Concert Week. It's just an ongoing education, just to be there concert week when you're in, you've got 3, 4, sometimes 5 big rehearsal sessions, 3-hour rehearsal sessions, and then the concert, just to see the whole process going through, watching international level conductors and soloists and musicians working. It's just such a thrill. It's an absolute honour to do it. And I can do that with my voice. I can't do it on my other instruments.
I think you do yourself down because I know you play in period performances.
I do, yeah. Love doing that. Yeah, I love playing with period flutes and things, period orchestras stuff. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, but eventually, when I was up in Gateshead, I was teaching. I've always taught music. I earned my living through music college, teaching adults. Yeah, I've always taught adults quite a lot. So they were older than me. And I ended up in Gateshead very quickly picking up some teaching. And so I was teaching on my afternoon off because you worked evenings, so you always had an afternoon off during the week. And then Saturday afternoons when the libraries were shut and everything else. And eventually had to make a choice between did I go into music back as my career or did I stay in librarianship. And I'd been in librarianship because of an interest in adult independent learning, as it was known in those days.
Right.
Helping adults continue with their own education. And even then, that was a major interest. That was why I was in public librarianship and stuff like that. And that closed down because the internet started up and everybody could do it for themselves. They didn't need the reference libraries anymore. So the career I'd gone into librarianship for ceased to exist as the internet opened up.
So is that when you took the left turn into teaching? That's
when I took, but 10 years self-employed as a music teacher.
Yeah. Before
I went into the classroom,
Right. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So in all of this, I've got the age-old question. Favourite concert that you performed in?
Oh, heavens.
You can lie. You can just pick one that comes in your head.
I really don't know if I've got a favourite concert that I've performed in. There's been a lot of highlights. I think one of the big highlights was a Verdi Requiem before the Sage was built. Mm-hmm. A Verdi Requiem in Newcastle Town Hall. And it was the first time I'd been part of a really huge one. And when that Dies Irae came in, that was spine-tingling. So I don't know about favourite concert, but it's one that really, really sticks in my memory.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So Stuart, last year you celebrated 30 years in the profession, which was a fantastic achievement. You've just had the one profession and you've stayed in music all the whole time. I'm impressed.
Not quite. I did manage 4 weeks as a civil servant after graduating from Manchester. 4 weeks, and then I just sprinted for the exit, crashed through the door, and that was it. I didn't look back. Well, after that I was unemployed. It was the 80s. It was the depths of the Depression then. Well, that was recession. I did a few informal, semi-professional gigs in folk music. Met some people from the northeast of England, and found the northeast of England and thought it's much easier being unemployed here than being unemployed down in Essex. Mm-hmm. So I moved up here and then discovered the Business Enterprise Programme. And like many musicians, particularly folk musicians, I became professional through the Business Enterprise Programme.
So did I.
There you go.
There's another coincidence. There we go.
It's astonishing.
Where did you land in the North East?
I landed in the North East in 1988.
Okay, so yeah, I came up as a librarian in about 83, 84,
Right.
but came into the music, of course, once I'd done that, so I would have been in business enterprise about the same time
Well,
to take me into music.
It must have been because the year I did the business enterprise program was the last year that you could do it as a musician. Prior to that, the only professions for self-employment that didn't qualify were gambling, fortune tellers, and prostitution. And the year after I finished, they added musicians to that list.
Says everything about the profession we need to know, really.
Doesn't it just? But yeah, from that point, 30 years, and I loved it. I've absolutely loved it. It's kept me in the lap of poverty, but a wonderfully interesting life, meeting wonderful people. Yeah.
So highlights along the way, because your CDs sort of show that you've worked with bands, you've toured, you've done various other things. Highlights along the way.
Crikey, this is going to sound incredibly cheesy, and I make no apologies for it, but big highlight for me, of course, was meeting my wife. How that happened in to do with music was that Tina had come over to the festival that we were holding in the band I was in for the Millennium. And we hadn't formally met, but apparently I trod on the toe.
Were you dancing?
No, surprisingly, that came later. My dancing is about as good as my singing. Say no more. But when we toured in Germany after that, Tina and her sister managed to get to a gig that we were doing in Hamburg that had been advertised in the wrong venue on the wrong day. The fact that we had any audience at all was a small miracle. But it was so bizarre that when it came to the interval, we just got off the stage and sat at different tables and chatted with the audience. And lucky old me, I sat at the table with Tina and her sister. And so that was a major highlight.
Yeah.
What about gigs that you would rather forget?
Oh dear me. Well, I wasn't doing a lot of gigging when I was doing my 10 years unemployed work. Sorry, 10 years, first set of 10 years self-employed work. I was on that in the teaching in this little tiny practice rooms around various schools and travelling 20,000 miles round a year with your sandwiches on the seat beside you and the instruments in the back. So I wasn't gigging a lot apart from playing occasionally for local orchestras and stuff like that, accompanying the local choirs and things. At that point, I wasn't doing a lot of performing other than singing,
right,
with the things. So I don't have gigs that I wish I hadn't done from that part of my career. I'm not going to admit to any, I don't think.
Oh, I can remember one I'll share with you, which was just bizarre. It was a last minute booking. An agent rang. I was playing in a Cayley band. Agent rang the caller to say, look, the band has cancelled. We've got a 40th birthday concert. They want a Cayley band. Can you get a band together for us? And I was the only musician in the band that could do it, so we got two Deps in. A keyboard player, lovely lady keyboard player, and a very young flute player who's now just top quality. Claire Mann, just a brilliant musician. But she was only about 14 then. And so the four of us went to the address that was supplied in Sunderland to play this gig.
Yeah.
And a big wagon and horses, something like that.
Yep.
Anyway, we arrived in there. It was a bit of a dingy looking place, sawdust on the floor. I'm expecting a Cayley band. Yeah. Room at the back. So we go to the back.
Yeah.
And there it was, a function room at the back of the pub with streamers. Happy 40th birthday, Bazza. Bazza was in the local Hells Angels chapter.
The Cayley band?
Well, they thought, something like the Pogues.
Right, okay,
That was their idea of a Cayley band. What we had was 3 musicians who hadn't played with each other before and whose only common repertoire was Carolan tunes. So, fortunately for us, the Hells Angels saw the funny side of it. But it was one of those square pegs and round holes occasions.
Yeah.
So.
I guess, because I was working with choirs, I wasn't setting up my own gigs.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't my fault if it went wrong. Or you could pretend, you could always just look at your neighbour and go, that was me.
That is a fundamental skill to develop as a professional, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
How to blame the person next to you. So when are we doing our first gig? Oh, goodness.
It got cancelled due to COVID.
We nearly did our first gig together.
We did. Yeah.
And then HISS is to blame for that. HISS
completely.
And the Greens.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Do you have a favourite HISS moment?
Oh, favourite HISS moments. I think a couple. Am I allowed a couple?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. One of them was the La Folia mashup that we did. We managed to get Stewart playing early music La Folia. But those of you that were there that year, it was such just an absolute scream. Everybody took it just free for all at the end. And the strip across the top of my website is of all the tutors in total hysterics as we finished it, because it was just such fun.
You see, my memory of that was I perspired a lot. I was so far out of my comfort zone.
You did an amazing job.
Yeah.
So it was that collaborative, on the edge, let's take this music where it doesn't normally go, which I really enjoyed about it.
HISS is good for that.
Yeah, absolutely stunning for that. And that's been good. The other big one is working with Viv for the first time and understanding, because the problem with being a tutor, as you'll know, is that you're aware you're working with all these amazing musicians, but because you're teaching at the same time in a different room, you don't get to work together. From that point of view, HISS is amazing because you do get the opportunity to do collaborations. And it was the first time I'd worked with Viv, and I realised that it was like working with a knowledgeable social historian, with social history told through the music, and social history is one of my other loves and interests. And it just opened up a whole other aspect to it, that you could represent history through the music that was happening at the period, which was great. So there's been loads and loads of others along the way with HISS. It's been fantastic. But anyway, what about you? Go on, highlights.
Well, you're absolutely right. I love the collaborative thing about that, and it's not just amongst the tutors. It's seeing the participants get together in the most weird and wonderful ways. And if
amazing set of musicians come along.
Absolutely. And I'll just say one word: boomwhackers.
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 Oh, I remember the boomwhackers. I know what you're talking about now.
They did the William Tell overture with boomwhackers and hard hats. It was just the most bizarre thing I have ever seen. Done with a straight face and with great musical integrity.
Completely.
It was.
Yes. No, I do remember the boomwhackers now.
It kind of encapsulated it.
It's
for
the
me.
Crumhorn group doing the doing ABBA.
I've got to say, when you mentioned Folia, that made me think of embarrassing moments, and that highlight for you was like a major trauma for me, and equally so. And it was 3 years ago when Becky suggested that we do the Ravens car round.
Oh yeah.
So there all the tutors lined up with the words, the dots,
and the words,
getting ready to sing, and then this 11-year-old voice piped up, "Oh, Dad, you're not gonna sing, are you?"
Second study singer.
So yeah. Comfort zone. People don't spend a lot of time in their comfort zone on the HISS courses.
Yeah, that is true, but you come out of it with a much wider comfort zone than you went in.
I'd go along with that.
Yeah.
I would go along with
Yeah,
that.
and so many other avenues to just start exploring.
What a great place to finish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I hope we see you next year.
It's got to happen. It's
Please.
got to happen. Yeah. Look forward to seeing you all.
Take very good care of yourselves.
Yep. Keep playing. See you next year.